Welcome to Learn English Speaking. Let's Talk Stories. Here we bring you amazing stories to improve your English fluency. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more exciting lessons. Let's learn together.
Chapter 9 Missing. Believed killed the next morning, Larry woke up early. The porters were already awake. They were moving around and talking outside Larry's tent. Greg was in the same tent as Larry. He was still asleep. Larry lay and listened to the noise of the wind. What will happen today? He thought to himself. Suddenly, one of the porters began shouting, "Toruk! Toruk!" Larry sat up and listened. "What's that?" asked Greg, waking up suddenly. "I don't know," Larry replied. "I think someone has seen the Toruk." Larry and Greg got up as fast as they could. They put on their boots and opened the front of the tent. There was thick cloud all round the tents. It was difficult to see anything clearly. The other members of the expedition were coming out of their tents. The porters were standing near the professor's tent. They were waving their arms and shouting. Professor Lugner was with them. Larry and Greg ran to the professor. In the snow, not far from the professor's tent, they saw claw marks. "It's the Toruk," shouted Larry. "The Toruk has been near the camp in the night," said Greg. "Look, the marks are clear. There is no new snow on top of them." The professor was bending over one of the claw marks. He was measuring it. He stood up and saw Larry and Greg. "This is the mark of the Toruk," he explained to them. "The Toruk's foot is 36 centimeters wide and 58 centimeters long. The claws are 8 centimeters long. The claws are 8 centimeters long. He drew a picture of the claw mark in his notebook. "At last the Toruk has come to us," the professor said. "We will see him soon." "I hope I don't meet him first," Greg said to Larry. "Why didn't the guards see the Toruk?" Larry asked. Suddenly, "I don't know," replied Greg. "Where's the guard?" Soon everyone was asking the same question. The guard was a young scientist called Guy. He had wanted to turn back when the weather became bad. "Perhaps he has gone back alone," someone said. "He wasn't very happy about the expedition." "That's impossible," said another scientist. "The weather is too bad to travel alone." The members of the expedition looked all round the camp. They called out the young man's name. They did not find him. They came back to the place where the claw marks were. Professor Lugner was still there. He had not moved. He was still making notes. Abdul, the guide, spoke to Larry and Greg. "Your friend is dead," he said. "The Toruk has taken him. You will never see him again." "How do you know?" Larry asked Abdul. "I have seen it happen before," Abdul replied. 4 other men died in the same way. "Perhaps Guy is still alive somewhere in the mountains," Greg said. "We still alive somewhere in the mountains," Greg said. Must search for him. We will follow the Torok's claw marks. Perhaps we will find Guy, and perhaps we will see the Torok too. That's a good idea. Everyone agreed. But Professor Lugner was very angry. He walked over to Greg. I'm the leader of this expedition, he said. Don't forget that. I'm sorry, sir, he said to the professor politely. But can't we go out and search for him? Professor Lugner looked at everyone standing round him. We will not search for him, he said in a loud voice. The Torok has taken Guy. We can't get him back. The men looked at each other in surprise. It's foolish to go out and search for him, the professor went on. The weather is too bad. More men will die. The men began to argue with the professor. If we don't look for Guy, we must go back to Khalid immediately, one man said. We will not search, Professor Lugner replied angrily. And I will not go back. I am the leader of this expedition. We will not go back until we have seen the Torok. It was snowing heavily again. The snow was falling on the Torok's claw marks. It was now difficult to see them clearly. The sky was white. More snow was coming. Go back to your tents, the professor shouted. Bakewell, you make the breakfast. We will stay here until the weather gets better. I will be the guard tonight. Everyone went back to their tents. Larry went to make breakfast. Greg and Abdul went with him. The same thing. Abdul was saying. What do you mean? Greg asked Abdul. We never found the 4 men who were killed on the last expedition, Abdul explained. We couldn't search for them because the weather was so bad. After breakfast, Larry looked again at his notebook. He read what he had written there. The professor said, the Torah killed them. Other members of the expedition said we did not look for the bodies. The weather was too bad. Why is Professor Lugner sure that the Torah killed Guy? Larry thought to himself. Chapter 10. Professor Lugner on guard. The snow fell all morning. The men stayed in their tents. They talked about Guy and about the Torok. Many of the men did not agree with Professor Lugner. We must look for Guy, they said. Perhaps he is still alive. We don't know that the Torok has killed him. The professor thinks only of the Torok, others said. He does not care about Guy. The porters were also talking about the Torok. Abdul was very worried. The afternoon, the snow stopped, and the weather was better. It was now possible to look for Guy. Some of the scientists went to talk to Professor Lugner. We want to search for Guy, they said to the professor. Professor Lugner did not argue. All right, he replied. It is very dangerous. But you can go. It was difficult to search. They could not see the Torok's claw marks. They were covered by the snow. After 3 hours, the men came back. They had not found anything. Why not found anything? The men were searching. Some of the porters went to see the professor. Abdul went with them. Many of the porters want to go back to Khalid, Abdul said to Professor Lugna. The weather is too bad. We cannot go on. And the porters are afraid of the Torok. The professor listened. At last he spoke. They can go back, he said. Abdul was surprised. He looked at the porters and then he looked at the professor. But who will carry all the equipment? He asked. The expedition will not leave this place, Professor Lugna replied. We will look for the Torok in the Mantra Pass. But how will you get back to Khalid without the porters? Abdul asked. We do not need porters, the professor replied angrily. When we go back to Khalid, we will leave the equipment here in the mountains. He looked at Abdul. You don't want to see the Torok, he said. But I cannot stop searching for the Torok now. There was a strange feeling in the camp that evening. I think the Torok is watching us, Larry said to Greg. And I said to Greg. And I think it is laughing at us, Greg replied. We haven't seen the Torok, but I feel it is here. Everyone was tired. Larry made a hot meal. The men talked together for a little while. Then they went to bed. Larry could not sleep. He was thinking about the questions in his notebook. There are not enough answers, he thought to himself. Larry fell asleep. He dreamt about the Torok. In his dream he saw the huge animal in Professor Lugner's office in London. It was standing near a tent. The tent was his tent. The Torok was trying to tear the tent with its sharp claws. Suddenly Larry woke up. He had heard a noise outside. He looked at his watch. It was 3:30. The professor is the guard now, Larry thought to himself. Larry listened. His eyes were wide open. Something was moving slowly near the camp. Am I still dreaming? Larry thought. Again he heard the sound. It was something large and heavy. It was moving very slowly away from the camp. Larry did not move. He knew that he was not dreaming now. Shall I wake Greg up? He thought. He moved towards Greg. No, he thought. If I wake him up, we will make too much noise. Larry picked up a large cooking knife. He listened again. The sound again was moving further away. He went out of the tent. It was dark outside, but there was some light in the east. Morning was coming. The snow had stopped falling. Perhaps the professor has fallen asleep, Larry thought. He went quietly to the professor's tent. There was no one in the tent. Then he saw the footprints in the snow. They were the professor's footprints. The footprints were going away from the camp. Larry followed them. Perhaps the professor heard the same sound too, Larry thought. Perhaps he needs help. The professor's footprints went to some high rocks. Then they stopped. Larry looked around. In the early morning light, he saw a huge claw mark in the snow. Then he saw another. The claw marks were going away from the rocks. Larry held the knife tightly in his hand. The Torok has been near the tents again, he thought to himself. But where is Professor Lugna? Larry looked up into the rocks. Perhaps the professor is hiding in the rocks. He had thought. He climbed up the rocks. He could not see the professor. Suddenly he stopped. He thought of Guy. Perhaps the Torque has killed Professor Lugner too, he said to himself. Larry quickly hid behind some rocks. He did not want the Torque to. He did not want the Torque to see him. He looked out over the snow. The sky was now brighter. The morning light was shining on the snow. Larry saw the Torque's claw marks clearly. They went across the snow. At the end of the track of claw marks, Larry saw a figure. He looked from between the rocks. The figure was Professor Lugner. Chapter 11. The professor's secret. Larry quietly moved over the rocks. He was now nearer to the professor. He hid behind a rock. The wind was blowing up the mountain towards Sword. Snow blew from the rocks into his face. His eyes filled with water. It was difficult to see. Larry watched the professor for some minutes. Professor Lugner was bending over in the snow. He was carrying something large and heavy. Larry rubbed his eyes and looked again. "I don't believe it," he said to himself. Larry watched the professor in amazement. Professor Lugner was holding a huge claw in his hands. He was making the Torque's claw marks. As the professor moved, Professor moved, putting the claw over his own footprints. He was hiding his footprints with the marks of the claw. The Torque's claw marks were left clearly in the snow. The wind was blowing towards Larry. He heard Professor Lugner speaking. The professor was Wadner speaking, talking to himself. As he made each claw mark, he said, "The Torque lives. They will see. The Torque lives." Sometimes the professor looked towards the tents. Larry hid behind the rocks. The professor did not see him. Larry watched in silence for many minutes. He felt angry. The professor has lied to us, he thought. He wanted to shout. He put his hands to his mouth. Suddenly a hand came round Larry's neck and covered his mouth. Another hand pulled his knife away from him. Larry fell backwards. Then he saw Greg and Abdul. They were bending over him. "Be quiet," Greg said. Larry pointed to the professor. "We know," said Greg. "We have seen him too." "Your professor is mad," said Abdul. "Everyone in the village knows that Abdul. He is mad." "But why did you follow me?" Larry asked. "Abdul heard you when you were leaving the camp," Greg replied. "He woke me up. We followed you over the rocks. You were in great danger," Abdul said to Larry. He looked at the ground and went on quietly. "Your professor has already killed 5 men. Larry listened in amazement. "5 men?" he asked. "Did Professor Lugner kill Guy and the other 4 men?" "We can't talk now," said Greg. "The professor will hear us. We must get back to the tents." The sun was rising over The mountains. Larry could hear the professor. He was still saying, "The Torok lives. They will see." Suddenly Professor Lugner looked up. Greg, Abdul, and Larry hid behind the rocks. The professor stood up and looked around. The huge claw was in his hands. "He has seen us," Larry said. "Keep down behind the rocks," Greg said. They lay still. Greg raised his head a little and looked again. The professor was bending over with the huge claw. "It's all right. He hasn't seen us," Greg said to the others. "He's finishing his work now." The professor made more claw marks. He was moving towards the rocks. "He's going to go back to the tents over the rocks," Greg said to Larry and Abdul. "We must go." They began to climb through the rocks. Larry looked back. He could see the professor. Professor Lugner had reached the rocks. He was holding the claw in his arms. Greg, Larry, and Abdul went round the tents. They got back before Professor Lugner. They went into their tent and waited. Chapter 12. Questions to answer. Abdul sat with Larry and Greg in their tent. None of them said anything. They waited and listened. Soon they heard Professor Lugner. He was coming back from the other side of the tents. "He has come back a different way," Greg said very quietly. "That's good. He won't see our footprints." Professor Lugner went into his tent. "Now we can talk," said Greg. "There are many things to talk about. First, I'll make some coffee," Larry said to the other two. They all felt thirsty and they wanted time to think. They drank their coffee slowly. "Can I ask the first question?" said Larry. "How did you know that the professor was making the Torok's claw marks?" "Abdul followed the professor yesterday," Greg replied. "He saw the professor making the claw marks near the tents." Abdul went on with the story. "Guy was the guard," he said. "He saw your professor too. They began to fight. Your professor too killed Guy with the Torok's claw. I saw it all. But why didn't you tell us this yesterday?" Larry asked Abdul. "I did not think that anyone would believe me," Abdul replied. Larry took out his notebook. "Now I can answer some of my questions. He said. "We know that Professor Lugner killed Guy, and we think that he killed the 4 men on the other expedition," said Greg. "They probably found out what he was doing. So that is why Professor Lugner always has different people on his expeditions," Larry said. "You remember that your professor didn't want me to come on the expedition," said Abdul. "He was afraid that I knew too much." Larry looked at his third question. "But many Afghan travelers have seen the Torok's claw marks too," Larry said to the others. "That's true," said Abdul. "Your professor has not made all the claw marks." Larry and Greg looked at each other. "Who made the other claw marks?" Greg asked Abdul. Abdul smiled and raised his hands in the air. "I don't know," he replied. Perhaps the Torok is alive. Perhaps the Torok does exist. Larry put down his notebook. So we don't have all the answers, he said. There were sounds outside. Some of the scientists were starting to wake up. What shall we do now? Larry asked Greg. Someone will find the claw marks soon. Greg thought for a while. We can't stop the expedition now, he said. I want to find the real Torok. Perhaps it is alive, but Professor Lugner may kill again, Larry said. Abdul looked up. Your professor is mad, he said to Larry. If you say anything, he will kill you. Greg turned to Larry. All right, he said. We won't tell anyone what we have seen. But we must watch Professor Lugner all the time, Larry agreed. It was time for breakfast. He had to make the food for everyone. He got up and went out of the tent. Greg followed him. Someone will find the Torok's claw marks soon, said Larry. Perhaps it will be Professor Rawmarks. Lugner, Greg replied. He doesn't want the scientists to see his footprints near the Torok's claw marks. The professor will find my footprints in the snow, Larry said to Greg. He will know that I saw him last night. Come on, Larry said. Come on, Larry said. We must hurry. We must find the Torok's claw marks before the professor does. They quickly ran towards the rocks. As they went, they ran over Larry's footprints. The professor won't see your footprints now, Greg said to Larry. They came to the rocks and found the claw marks in Professor Lugner's last footprint. They stopped and shouted, Claw marks! The Torok! Some of the scientists ran out of their tents. They came up to Larry and Greg and looked at the claw marks. Everyone was excited. Professor Lugner came up to them. He looked worried. He knows that we have seen his footprint beside the Torok's claw mark, Larry thought to himself. He wanted to get here first. Greg began to talk to some of the scientists. He wanted the professor to hear him. Professor Lugner has already seen the claw marks, he said. He saw them last night. Look, here are his footprints. Professor Lugner looked surprised. He spoke slowly. Yes, I saw them last night, he said. I was going to tell you all after breakfast. I didn't tell you all after breakfast. Not want to frighten the porters again. Greg walked up to the professor and shook his hand. Congratulations, sir, he said. You must be very happy. We are sure to see the Torok soon. That is my dream, he said. Many people say that the Torok does not exist, but now we know that he does. He began to speak more loudly. The Torok lives, he went on. They will see. He is alive. Larry looked at Greg. They remembered those words. Greg spoke again to the professor. Bakewell, and I want to guard the camp tonight, sir, he said. We want to see the Torok. Professor Lugner agreed. Who will be the other guard? Professor Lugner asked the scientists. It is very dangerous. The Torok has already taken one man. Abdul came to the front. I will be the other guard, he said. The professor looked at him and said nothing. If Abdul is the other guard, the porters will feel happier, one of the scientists said. The others agreed. The professor looked down at the Torok's claw marks, and then at Abdul. Abdul smiled. All right, Abdul will be the other guard, the professor said. Then he walked away. Chapter 13, Noises in the Night. Larry cooked breakfast. Everyone ate together, but Professor 1 ate together. But Professor Lugner was not there. He stayed in his tent. Everyone was talking about the Torok. Larry, Greg, and Abdul did not say anything about what they had seen. After breakfast, Professor Lugner talked to the men. Together they made plans for their search. One of the scientists spoke about the weather. The weather will be very good today, he said. But it is going to get bad soon. There will be strong winds and more heavy snow. We haven't much time, Professor Lugner said to the members of the expedition. Today, some of us will search above those rocks. The others will come with me. We will search around Mount Canchin. Larry and Greg went with Professor Lugner. They watched him carefully. They started to climb Mount Canchin. It was very steep, and they climbed slowly. The sky was blue. They could see other mountains far away to the north. They searched all day. They found nothing. They returned to the tents in the early evening. The others were already evening. The others were already there. They had not seen the Torok or its claw marks. The sun set behind the mountains. It became dark. Larry was the first guard. While the others slept, he sat in his tent. If you hear the professor, wake me up, Greg said to Larry. Bad, said to Larry. Beg, said to Larry. Bad. Weather is coming, and he will probably go out again tonight. Larry wrote in his diary as usual and listened. What am I listening for? He asked himself. Am I listening for Lugner? Or am I listening for the real Torok? Larry was very tired. Larry was very tired. After the climbing and the walking, it was difficult to keep awake. Sometimes he fell asleep for a moment, but he soon woke up. Later in the night, he made some coffee. At 11 o'clock, Larry heard noises outside. Professor Lugner was coming out of his tent. He came towards Larry's tent and stopped. He called Larry's name quietly. Bakewell, Bakewell, are you awake? He asked. Larry suddenly felt very frightened. Does he know that I saw him making the claw marks? He thought. Does he want to kill me now? Larry did not speak. The professor went away. He went back to his own tent. Larry listened. He heard the professor opening a box. Then he heard the box closing again. So that's where he keeps the claw. Larry thought to himself, it's in his metal box. Now I know why he watched the box so carefully. Larry moved quietly to the door of his tent and watched carefully. He saw Professor Lugner coming out of his tent. The professor walked slowly away from the camp. When he reached the rocks, he began to make the claw marks. Larry woke Greg up. They went out of the tent together and climbed the rocks. The professor was going a different way this time. He climbed a small hill of snow towards the north. Larry and Greg could not see him now. "Shall we follow him?" Larry asked Greg. "No," Greg replied. "We mustn't leave our footprints in the snow. We must stay here. If anyone follows the professor, we must stop them." They sat and listened for sounds from the tents. They listened for the professor. Everything was quiet. Larry and Greg waited for half an hour. "I'm getting cold," Larry said to Greg. "So am I," said Greg. "We'll go back to the tents soon. We can listen from our tent." They climbed back towards the camp. Suddenly in the north, they heard a terrible scream. Larry and Greg stopped and listened. Everything was silent. There were no sounds. Chapter 4